A floating city with its own power grid, its own water supply, its own hospital, and somewhere inside it, a piece of artwork is secretly holding up 6 entire decks above thousands of people. This is Icon of the Seas, the largest cruise ship ever built. A machine so massive engineers spent 7 years fighting one brutal problem. The heavier the ship became, the closer it got to becoming unusable. Every water slide needed more steel. Every restaurant added pressure. Every luxury suite pushed this floating city closer to the limits of physics. In January 2024, Icon of the Seas left Miami carrying nearly 10,000 people. That's more than people who live in some small towns. All trusting that this giant moving city, built from steel, fuel lines, glass walls, electrical cables, and pressure systems, would survive the open ocean. But hidden underneath the restaurants, casinos, and water parks is a ship filled with engineering compromises between weight and stability, between luxury and survival, between entertainment and disaster prevention. Because on Icon of the Seas, almost nothing has just one purpose. The walls support other rooms. The air conditioning system recycles engine heat. Even the decorations are secretly structural. And before this ship ever touched water, one mistake almost doomed the entire project. The project started in 2016. At first, it wasn't even called Icon of the Seas. Inside Royal Caribbean, it was something closer to an experiment. A white paper project, which basically means start with impossible ideas first and figure out later whether physics allows them. The company wanted something the cruise industry had never seen before, not just a bigger ship, a floating resort. A place where families could spend an entire week on board without ever feeling bored. Water parks, ice rinks, shopping districts, live plants, indoor waterfalls, 7 swimming pools, more than 40 places to eat and drink. All inside a structure floating in salt water. And that's where the nightmare began, because cruise ships can't just grow forever. The ocean punishes weight. Every new attraction required more support beams. More support beams meant more steel. More steel meant a heavier ship. A heavier ship sinks deeper into the water, and the deeper it sinks, the fewer ports it can physically enter. The engineers weren't designing a vacation. They were fighting mathematics. At one point, the ship became so large that designers faced a terrifying possibility. What if the final ship physically couldn't operate in major cruise ports? That would mean billions of dollars, wasted on a floating monument nobody could use. So the team made a radical decision. Instead of expanding outward, they built upward. But building upward created a second problem. How do you support the weight of an entire vertical city without filling every room with giant, ugly support columns? The answer ended up hiding in plain sight, and almost every passenger walks past it without realizing what it really is. At the center of Icon of the Seas sits something called the Pearl, a glowing steel sculpture stretching through the Royal Promenade. Passengers see it as decoration, a fancy centerpiece, a selfie spot, but the Pearl wasn't designed to impress tourists. It exists because the ship had a structural problem. Hidden inside that artwork is a massive steel support column, carrying the weight of multiple decks above it. Without it, part of the ship literally could not stand. Most architects hide structural beams behind walls. The engineers here turned theirs into art. And once you notice that idea, you start seeing it everywhere. Nothing on this ship does only one job. The stairwells also move ventilation air between decks. The glass roof helps manage heat and energy efficiency. Even the handrails help ground electrical systems during storms at sea. Everything multitasks. Because on a vessel, this large, wasted space becomes dangerous, and nowhere was that more important than the air itself. The Icon of the Seas has thousands of toilets on board, and unlike a hotel on land, there's nowhere for the problem to go if the plumbing fails. No city sewer system, no external backup, just the ocean, which means a single system failure could spiral into a public health disaster. So the engineers overbuilt everything. The ship uses a giant vacuum waste system connected to multiple redundant collection tanks. If one section fails, another section immediately takes over. If pressure drops somewhere in the system, backup pumps activate automatically. Everything has layers, and then the waste enters one of the most advanced treatment systems ever installed on a passenger vessel. Water gets filtered, cleaned, processed, and reused throughout the ship. Deck washing, cooling systems, irrigation. Thousands of plants growing inside the aquadome. Even the gardens are connected, nothing exists independently. Everything feeds something else. And that same survival mentality extends to the ship's evacuation systems too. And even the lifeboats were engineered to do more than save lives. Most people think lifeboats are simple: lower them into the water, load passengers, escape. But on Icon of the Seas, even the lifeboats became part of the engineering philosophy. Each one contains its own propulsion system. Independent engines, independent navigation systems, independent communication systems. Because the designers assumed the worst-case scenario from the beginning: power failure, engine failure, navigation failure. The ocean doesn't care how expensive your ship is. That's why nearly every major system on board has backups, and backups for the backups. The ship contains thousands of kilometers of electrical cabling, tens of thousands of lights, massive stabilization systems hidden underneath the hull, enough technology on board to rival parts of a small city. And all of it exists for one reason: to make passengers forget how fragile the entire thing really is. The truth is, a cruise ship is basically a controlled emergency that never happens. An Icon of the Seas might be the most controlled version humanity has ever built, but the final secret of the ship isn't mechanical. It's psychological. Nothing on board is accidental. The corridors curve on purpose. The staircases force movement through social areas. The attractions are stacked vertically, so your eyes constantly search for what's above or below you. Even the lighting changes depending on the time of day to subtly influence energy and movement on board. The ship was engineered to make standing still feel impossible, and that matters because boredom is dangerous for a cruise business. The longer passengers stay engaged, the longer they spend money. So Icon of the Seas became something much bigger than transportation. It became a machine built to control experience itself. A floating environment carefully designed to keep nearly 10,000 people entertained, moving, distracted, and comfortable every second of the day. And underneath all the music, restaurants, water slides, and performances, it still has to function as one of the most advanced engineering systems ever placed on water. Which brings us back to the Pearl, that giant glowing sculpture hidden in the center of the ship. Because it perfectly represents what Icon of the Seas really is: a machine where nothing is ever doing just one thing. The ocean has been destroying ships for thousands of years. Storms, salt, pressure, fire, corrosion, failure. And yet humanity keeps building bigger, more ambitious, more impossible. The Icon of the Seas may be the most extreme example of that obsession ever created, not because it's luxurious, not because it's massive, but because every inch of it was designed around one terrifying reality. A machine this complicated can fail in thousands of different ways, and it still has to survive. So the next time you see a cruise ship crossing the ocean, don't just see a vacation. See thousands of engineers trying to outsmart physics itself, and for now somehow winning.